Taos County, New Mexico, May 14, 2026. 14 people moved through scrub brush in the pre-dawn cold, closing a perimeter around a 22-acre property off State Road 68. No sirens, no lights, radio traffic reduced to single-word confirmations. A K-9 unit from the Taos County Sheriff held position at the south fence line, waiting. The temperature was 34 degrees. Frost had settled across the high desert scrub. Breath fogged at the mouth of every agent on that perimeter. Body camera footage from the lead agent shows the inside of the property at first light, a man moving along the front paddock fence, rubber boots, a feed bucket swinging at his side. He does not look toward the road. He has no reason to. For 6 months, this had been a quiet morning routine, unremarkable to any neighbor who might have glanced over from the highway outside Rancho de Taos. He was not Silas Corcoran. His name was Mateo Reyes Aldana, Senior Special Agent, Homeland Security Investigations, Phoenix Field Office. 14 months earlier, he had walked away from one of the most sensitive positions in federal law enforcement with an estimated $1.6 million in laundered cryptocurrency and a second identity built over 18 months of careful preparation. He had left his service weapon and credentials in a locker at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport and driven north without looking back. The US Marshals Service had been looking for him ever since. What follows is the account of a 13-month federal fugitive hunt spanning 6 states, 3 parallel investigations, and one detail so small that only one analyst in a task force of dozens thought to check it. Mateo Reyes Aldana joined Homeland Security Investigations in 2014 after 4 years as a customs officer in El Paso. He moved through the ranks at a pace that drew consistent praise from supervisors. By 2021, he held a senior position in the Phoenix Field Office's Financial Crimes Unit, a role that gave him access to classified intelligence repositories, seized asset inventories, and, critically, a specialized database of cartel telematics data. Telematics is the electronic tracking and communications infrastructure that sophisticated criminal networks use to coordinate logistics, intercepted and cataloged over years of joint operations. This data represented one of the most sensitive collections in HSI Phoenix's holdings. It mapped routes, timing windows, contact hierarchies, and signal protocols for organizations operating across the Southwest Corridor. Aldana had clearance to access that database for legitimate investigative purposes. Between early 2021 and April 2025, he accessed it approximately 340 times. A routine audit later determined that fewer than 60 of those access events corresponded to active case files he was assigned to. The remaining accesses corresponded to something else entirely. The scheme ran through an intermediary. Federal prosecutors later identified the broker as an entity called Meridian Data Solutions, registered in Delaware, with a listed business address in Scottsdale, Arizona, that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. Meridian contracted with private sector clients described in court filings as a logistics intelligence network with indirect ties to a Sinaloa-adjacent distribution hierarchy operating across Arizona, Sonora, and Chihuahua. The arrangement was simple in structure and extraordinarily dangerous in practice. Aldana would extract segments of the telematics database, sanitize them to remove obvious federal watermarks, and pass them through an encrypted file-sharing protocol to a contact he knew only by the handle Jallo Verde. That contact would transmit the data to Meridian, which would repackage and resell it to the end buyer. Aldana received payment in Monero, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency that offers significantly stronger anonymity properties than Bitcoin. Radar tracking displays and blockchain analysis printouts recovered during evidence collection tell the financial story in aggregate. Approximately 50 verified data transfers over 4 years, each averaging roughly $33,000 in compensation. Agents photographed the documentation spread across an evidence collection table. The total, reconstructed after Aldana's disappearance, lands just under $1.6 million, a figure the blockchain ledger, pulled during the post-arrest forensic sweep, does not contradict. What the telematics data gave the buyers was, in effect, a counter-surveillance map. Knowing which routes, timing windows, and contact protocols federal investigators had flagged meant knowing which ones to avoid. For 4 years, a criminal logistics network received intelligence drawn from inside a federal law enforcement database and used it to route operations around interdiction efforts. One detail from the indictment reads almost like fiction. In late 2023, HSI Phoenix conducted a joint operation with DEA and CBP targeting a suspected trafficking corridor through the Sonoran Desert. The operation's planning documents, marked sensitive but unclassified, were briefed in a meeting that Aldana attended. 3 weeks later, 2 shipments that should have moved through the targeted corridor were rerouted. Both arrived at their destinations undetected. Investigators cannot prove Aldana tipped the corridor change, but the indictment includes the timeline, and the timeline does not require much interpretation. The investigation that eventually exposed the scheme did not begin with Aldana. It began with the sealed grand jury proceeding he was running from. Surveillance monitor footage from the DHS Office of Inspector General shows what a compliance anomaly looks like before it becomes a case. a financial disclosure spreadsheet, a cursor moving down a column of figures, an analyst named Carrie Lund running numbers that an automated system had already cleared. The growth in a Phoenix field office senior agent's declared assets was small and steady across 3 years, never large enough to trigger automatic review. Lund ran the calculation by hand. The trajectory did not fit the salary. She flagged it. She requested supplemental access to the agent's travel and expense records. Then she requested the access logs for 3 classified databases the agent held credentials for. What she found in the telematics database access log required a second analyst to review before she would proceed, then a third. By March 2025, a sealed federal grand jury had been convened in the District of Arizona. By early April, prosecutors had enough to seek an indictment on multiple counts. A hearing was scheduled for April 14, 2026. Mateo Reyes Aldana disappeared on April 8. He left his service weapon, badge, and HSI credentials in locker 447 at Sky Harbor's Terminal 4 garage. His personal vehicle, a 2019 Ford F-250 registered in his name, was recovered 11 days later in a long-term parking structure in Flagstaff. The vehicle contained nothing of investigative value. No luggage impressions in the cargo bed. No fuel receipts. No convenience store cameras had picked up a clear image of him after April 7. He had clearly planned the exit carefully and executed it without visible hurry. The US Marshals Service opened the fugitive file within 72 hours under the designation Operation Clear Ledger. The initial task force comprised 11 investigators drawn from the Southwest Regional Fugitive Task Force and the Marshals Special Operations Group. Here's what makes this case different from a standard fugitive pursuit. Aldana was not a civilian who panicked and ran. He was a trained federal agent who had spent more than a decade studying how federal fugitive operations work. He knew the databases, he knew the protocols, he knew which mistakes would leave traces. The investigators pursuing him understood from day one that they were operating against someone who had the same institutional knowledge they did. The first month produced nothing actionable. Aldana had not used his real name on any transaction investigators could find. His cell phones, both personal and agency-issued, went dark on April 7, the day before his disappearance. His bank accounts showed no withdrawals after March 31. His cryptocurrency holdings, once located through blockchain analysis, had been consolidated and moved through a series of mixing transactions that, at the time, resisted attribution. The task force was working a case with no financial trail, no cell signal, no credit card activity, and a subject who understood surveillance methods. 3 months of sustained effort produced no confirmed sightings. I spent time going through the task force's post-capture briefing documents, and one section kept returning in my reading. The Marshals' internal assessment noted that the operation's early phase was the most professionally difficult any member of the team had worked. Not because of physical danger, but because of the absence of error. Aldana had committed almost none of the mistakes that fugitive hunters rely on. Almost. The contact known as Gallo Verdier was identified in September 2025 through a parallel track. A separate DHS OIG investigation into Meridian Data Solutions, running independently of the Marshals' fugitive file, had by that point mapped 11 individuals believed to be connected to the broker network. Among the materials recovered during the search of a Scottsdale storage unit was a partial ledger of transactions, formatted in a way that suggested multiple source agents, not just one. When OIG investigators unsealed that storage unit in early September, what they encountered was not the disorganized cache of a panicked criminal. The ledger was printed on standard weight paper, held in a manila folder with a typed label. The transaction records were organized by date, then by buyer code, then by data category. Whoever had assembled it had worked methodically. That methodical quality was itself a data point. Investigators noted it immediately. That discovery expanded the scope of the OIG investigation significantly. It also produced a document that connected Gallo Verde to a specific encrypted communications platform. The FBI's cyber division ran a technical operation against the platform in October 2025. What they recovered included partial message logs, device fingerprints, and, buried in the metadata of one archived file transfer, an IP address that had been accessed through a commercial VPN service. The VPN provider, operating under a court order in a jurisdiction with mandatory data retention requirements, produced logs showing the underlying IP. The underlying IP resolved to a rural internet service provider in northern New Mexico. The service area covered 3 counties. One of them was Taos. That connection did not immediately produce Aldana. It produced a geographic zone of approximately 200 square miles. Marshals analysts began cross-referencing every federal and state record touching the zone: agricultural registrations, vehicle registrations, LLC filings, property tax records, utility hookups, hunting licenses, and inspection logs maintained by the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. The lead came from an analyst named Torres, working a night shift in November 2025. She was running a cross-reference of LLC-registered agents against a shell address database that the Phoenix case had produced. One LLC had been registered in September 2024, 8 months before Aldana's disappearance, to operate a livestock operation in Taos County. The registered agent address was a post office box in Santa Fe. That post office box appeared in the Phoenix case database as a secondary address associated with a financial instrument linked to a Meridian-adjacent shell entity. Interrogation room footage shows agents laying documents on the table, an LLC registration bearing the name Silas Corcoran, an agricultural inspection log from November 2025 listing him as owner and primary operator of a 22-acre alpaca ranch outside Taos. The paper identity was clean. It had passed every automated check. It took a human running the numbers manually to find the seam. Torres flagged it at 11:48 p.m. By 7 a.m. the following morning, the connection had been reviewed by 3 senior marshals investigators and forwarded to the Special Operations Group for operational planning. They spent 6 months confirming before they moved. This is worth understanding. The marshals had a probable location by November 2025. They executed the capture in May 2026. The interval was not delay, it was discipline. They needed to be certain the man on that ranch was Aldana, not a coincidence. They needed to ensure he hadn't established early warning systems or escape routes they hadn't mapped. And they needed to coordinate with the OIG investigation to ensure the capture did not prematurely collapse the broader broker network case. What do you think when investigators know where a fugitive is but wait 6 months to move? Is that patience, or does the system's caution create its own risks? Surveillance of the property began in December 2025. Aircraft, ground-based observation, analysis of utility consumption patterns, periodic agricultural inspection visits conducted by cooperating state officials who noted the property's registered operator without arousing suspicion, cell signal analysis conducted with legal authority, identifying a device on the property that matched behavioral patterns consistent with Aldana's known phone usage habits. Ground-based observation teams rotated on 72-hour cycles. They used a forward observation post established in a dry arroyo approximately 1,400 meters from the property's north fence line, concealed under terrain-matching camouflage netting. From that position, they documented the property occupant's daily routine across 11 weeks of observation. Feeding times, vehicle movements, hours of interior lighting, the precise sequence in which outbuilding doors were opened each morning. The data was logged, time-stamped, and assembled into a behavioral pattern document that the SOG would rely on for final operational planning. In February 2026, a long-range photographic observation confirmed the property's primary occupant matched Aldana's physical description. In March, biometric analysis of the photographs reached a confidence threshold that satisfied the SOG's operational criteria. Operational planning ran through April 2026. The team built a terrain model of the property. They had identified the morning feeding routine as the optimal capture window because it placed the subject in open ground away from the structure, reduced the likelihood of a barricade scenario, and aligned with the K9 unit's deployment parameters. They established 4 approach vectors and 2 contingency withdrawal routes in case of armed resistance. The operation called for a 14-person SOG deployment, plus the Taos County Sheriff K9 unit. Total coordination involved representatives from HSI, DHS, OIG, the FBI's Cyber Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Mexico. On May 13, 2026, the team staged at a pre-positioned location approximately 7 miles from the target property. At 0:30 a.m. on May 14, they began approach. At 05:47 a.m., the perimeter was established. Here is a take that will probably draw some disagreement. A trained federal agent spending 13 months undetected on a livestock ranch in rural New Mexico is not a story about criminal genius. It is a story about institutional blind spots. The telematics database Aldana was exploiting had inadequate anomaly detection protocols for insider threat scenarios. The access logs that eventually exposed him were readable only to a human analyst who thought to look. For 4 years, the mechanism that should have caught unusual database access patterns did not. The failure here belongs to the system's architecture as much as to the individual who exploited it. Body camera footage captures the moment at 05:51 a.m., a figure walking out of the alpaca pen, bucket in hand, who stops dead when the tactical team steps into his sightline. The agent's camera swings left and right, showing the perimeter closing in from 3 directions. A K9 unit moves in from the south fence line. Mateo Reyes Aldana does not run. He stands very still and watches them come. He set the bucket down. He did not reach for anything. He did not run. According to the operational after-action report, He complied with all instructions immediately and was taken into custody without incident within approximately 90 seconds of first contact. The after-action report notes he made no statement at the point of arrest, no questions, no protest. He was handcuffed, walked to a waiting vehicle, and transported to the Taos County Sheriff's Facility for processing before federal transfer. The 14 agents who had spent the night closing that perimeter stood down in a pre-dawn silence broken only by wind off the mesa. The search of the property took 4 hours. Inside a hollowed structural post in the shearing shed, investigators found $340,000 in United States currency, bundled and vacuum-sealed. In the ranch house, concealed behind a false wall panel in the bedroom closet, 2 encrypted solid-state drives were recovered in a waterproof case. A loaded Glock 19, unregistered, was recovered from a lockbox under the bed. Additional documents pertaining to the fabricated Corcoran identity, including a driver's license, a social security card, and a passport in various stages of completion, were cataloged as evidence. The encrypted drives were the operational priority. Within 48 hours of transfer to the FBI's forensic laboratory in Quantico, analysts had accessed both drives using decryption keys obtained through a separate investigative method the Department of Justice has not disclosed in full. What was on the drives was the complete customer ledger of the Meridian Data Solutions broker network, transaction records, contact identifiers, payment confirmations, and what appeared to be a structured archive of the telematics data segments Aldana had passed over 4 years. The ledger identified 14 distinct customers. Of those, prosecutors determined 9 were sufficiently identified for immediate action. Within 4 weeks of Aldana's capture, 9 additional arrests had been made in connection with the broker network. The arrests spanned Arizona, California, Nevada, and Texas. Among those arrested were 3 individuals with prior employment in licensed security consulting firms with federal contractor relationships, 2 individuals connected to the logistics entity described in the indictment as Sinaloa adjacent, and 4 individuals whose roles in the network have not been publicly detailed in pending proceedings. Mateo Reyes Aldana faces a 47-count federal indictment. The counts include conspiracy to commit espionage under 18 U.S.C. 794, multiple counts of wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and unauthorized access to a protected computer system. The espionage-adjacent charges carry potential sentences that federal prosecutors have publicly described as among the most serious available in the statutory framework for insider threat cases. If you have followed cases like this before, or if you know someone who works in federal law enforcement, comment below, does this level of insider breach change how you think about who can be trusted with access to sensitive databases? The case has become a reference example inside the Marshals Service for what the agency calls cross-jurisdictional persistence, the operational methodology of maintaining a fugitive hunt across agency boundaries, jurisdictional lines, and investigative timelines that do not naturally align. A standing lesson, documented and circulated. Surveillance footage from months of pre-raid monitoring shows what drew investigators here in the first place. A working ranch with minimal outside traffic, no loading docks, no regulated shipments, no federal inspectors walking the fence line. Dash camera recordings from agent drive-bys show a property that looked week after week exactly like nothing. That invisibility was the point. The choice of cover reflected the instincts of someone who understood which doors federal compliance officers never knocked on. The preparation was meticulous. The exit plan was professional. And it still failed because one analyst on a night shift cross-referenced one LLC registered agent address against a shell address database from a case in another city. 14 months, 6 states. 11 co-conspirators identified inside the broker network, 2 encrypted drives containing 4 years of stolen federal intelligence, and a 22-acre alpaca ranch in the high desert of northern New Mexico that almost worked as a permanent disappearance. The network is dismantled. The intelligence Aldana sold over 4 years remains in the hands of buyers who have not all been identified. The drives produced 14 customer records. Investigators confirmed 9 were actionable. The other 5 remain open items in an ongoing proceeding. What the data was used for in the years it was active has not been fully mapped. 5 of the 14 customers are still being investigated. The full scope of operational damage to federal interdiction efforts in the Southwest Corridor is, as of August 2026, still being assessed. Forensic photography from the post-arrest sweep documents what the ranch became. Empty stalls, tagged evidence markers staked into the dirt, a shearing shed post circled in yellow tape. Evidence collection teams move through the frame, bagging and photographing. The alpacas are gone. What remains is the paper trail the agents came for. Subscribe so you don't miss the follow-on coverage as the broker network prosecutions move forward. 14 customers in the ledger, 9 arrested. The other 5 are still out there.